to our esteemed guests, members of the diplomatic community, and friends from around the world. Welcome to our May installment of A Seat at the Table, Women in Global Leadership Series. As we celebrate May as World Trade Month, it is with high honor and distinct pleasure that we welcome today Her Royal Highness, Princess Reema bint Bandar Al Saud, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the United States of America. My name is Maureen Pace, and I'm the CEO of the World Trade Center Dublin, Ireland, and also serve as the Vice President of the Drew Company. This program and series we present to you has been inspired by author Susan Sloan and her book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. Her book has been written for aspiring women leaders. In it, she shares lessons and experiences from dynamic principles on how to succeed, not only in the diplomatic sphere, but also in life. Susan has been our moderator for this series, and we are pleased to have her here again today to lead our conversation with Her Royal Highness. We are especially pleased to be discussing the evolving role of women in Saudi Arabia. Saudi women are expected to play a vital role in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's development strategy Vision 2030. The number of Saudi women holding managerial positions has increased during this past decade, with the kingdom recently enacting new reforms toward improving on its record of female empowerment and gender equality. Before we get started, I want to extend my gratitude to our team and company for inviting me to be part of this series. I am honored to be one of our many female executives at our parent company, the Drew Company, and I am pleased to be here representing the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C., and Dublin, Ireland. The World Trade Center, Washington, D.C. is the trade programming arm of the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. For 20 years, our company, TCMA, has proudly served as the executive manager of the Ronald Reagan Building through a unique public-private partnership with the U.S. General Services Administration. Together, we have developed the Reagan Building into a hub for government, business, global commerce, and cultural exchange. I want to give a special thank you to our partners, the Associates of American Foreign Services Worldwide, the Azar Foundation for Children of the World, Howard University School of Business, and the Women's Business Collaborative. We value your continued partnership. Now, it is my pleasure to formally introduce our moderator for today's program, Ms. Susan Sloan. In addition to authoring A Seat at the Table, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World, Susan has met with more than 60 countries through diplomacy, advocacy, and experiential learning. And at the age of only 30, she completed a life goal of visiting all 7 continents. Susan holds a degree in Global Strategic Communications from Georgetown University, and it will come as no surprise to you, graduated magna cum laude. We thank you again for joining us this morning, and we hope that you enjoy what I'm certain will be a fascinating conversation. Without further ado, I hand it over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Maureen, and welcome everyone. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table. We're so glad you could join us, no matter where you're joining us from. You might be at your desk, your kitchen table, your couch, maybe your patio outside as the weather warms in the United States. Maybe you have a child in your arms. Maybe you're even at the office as offices are beginning to open up. However, no matter where you are, you're here. You made it. A special thank you to the Reagan Building and the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C. and Dublin, and TCMA for creating this series, A Seat at the Table, Women in Global Leadership. There are many people behind the scenes right now, more than you know, and a special thank you goes to all of them. You know who you are. The series, like Maureen said, is based on my book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. I interviewed more than 30 leaders from around the world, ambassadors, foreign ministers, and government officials. They all had varying styles of leadership. Now, these women were from all over the world. We're talking about Afghanistan, Albania, Australia, Bulgaria, Croatia, Denmark, Finland, France, Hungary, Iceland, Kosovo, Kurdistan, North Macedonia, Mexico, Namibia, Singapore, Sweden, and the US. Why did I go on this journey? Well, as some of you may have seen in the opening credits today, foreign policy research states that companies with the highest percentage of women in management are 47% more profitable than the lowest. And participation of civil society groups, including women's organizations, make a peace agreement 64% less likely to fail. Gender parity, equity, and equality positively benefits everyone. And right now, as we're hopefully nearing the pandemic, countries are facing so many challenges: migration, terrorism, climate change, the spread of fast-paced technology. So who is around the table? It matters. And the business case cannot really solve this gender diversity issue. It's personal. And we need these personal stories to understand why it's important and what we can do to change the system. In this series, you've heard from a few global leaders who have a seat at the table. And have no fear, if you've missed some of these conversations, they have been recorded, as is this one. And they're available on the YouTube channel of the Ronald Reagan Building at International Trade Center. After a week from the program, you'll hear this conversation, so you can share it with friends and family. If you have questions during this event, you can submit it in the Q&A chat function. I will be looking at this live, and I will be asking live questions to the ambassador. Also, feel free to join us online, share comments and questions with the hashtags, hashtag seat at the table, hashtag where leaders lead, and the social handles include at Reagan ITCDC, or you can tweet at me at Real Susan Sloan, and we look forward to engaging with you online. Our honored guest today is Her Royal Highness Princess Reema bint Bandar Saud. She is a founder. She's a CEO of many companies. She's an ambassador. She's a leader for financial literacy for women. She's also a member of her country's Olympic Committee. She's a permanent representative to UNESCO, and she's the first woman to lead a multi-sports federation in the kingdom. And of course, she's a princess and a mother. And before we go into our conversation today, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Her Highness. Ambassador, we welcome you to a seat at the table. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Susan. I very much appreciate it. And Maureen and everyone who's behind the scenes today. You know, I've recently engaged in a conversation with you, Susan, that was hosted by the World Council in Denver. And I'm sure today's conversation will be just as energizing. Susan, as an author, a global advocate whose journey has taken her around the world to engage with diplomats, community organizers, and international leaders alike, has in such a short period of time lived many lives. And I can relate to that, as can many women. We don't always end where we started, and we have to accept the fact that the journey has to evolve as we do, as the world does. But before becoming an ambassador, as Susan mentioned, I did wear many other hats. However, what I recognized as a common thread in everything that I've done was a focus on expanding the opportunities for women and for young people, and all of them working around diversity, inclusiveness, equity, whether I knew that that was my mission then or not. I discovered it later, but the thread was so clear to me right now. And in each hat, in each life that I lived, it informed me and it prepared me for the work that I'm doing right now, to be honest. Whether it was as a businesswoman working towards female inclusion in the retail space, or whether it was as a mother coming back from the United States to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, trying to find things for my children to do, or if it's working in government, trying to find my space and the space for other women. It wasn't easy at first. And, you know, not all women are ready or were ready for the transition. And there were barriers, and there still are, for everywhere across the world for women, whether they are in Nairobi, whether they're in Washington, D.C., or they're in Riyadh. Insufficient access to childcare, significant barrier. And it was particularly for us in the kingdom. And so we decided as a business to be one of the first to introduce childcare into our store. And that was a first in the kingdom. And we saw the benefit of it. We saw what it looked like for a woman to have the time to not only work and focus on it, but as we all do, be able to think about her children and have them accessible right close to her. And I think that was quite critical and important. And we have to step up. We can't wait for change to happen sometimes. We have to make the space for it. We have to take responsibility. And that's what I try to do as an ambassador. As many of you know, my father was an ambassador before me. He remains and still is the model, I think, of a Saudi diplomat. And during his tenure of 23 years, I grew up in the United States and I had the opportunity to live here. And as a Saudi, I had the opportunity to be immersed in this culture of the United States of America. Saudi Arabia and the United States, both of them, I find I'm lucky to have experienced life in both countries because it prepared me not only to work in the kingdom and bring dreams and aspirations of things that I saw as I grew up here, but also working and living in the kingdom has allowed me to represent my nation to the core and the essence of this change that we're trying to have. And when I took up my diplomatic post, my father took me aside and he told me that today's times are different than the times he were there, but they're equally as important and equally as challenging. And he advised me to keep in mind every day what's at stake, what the responsibility that I had, to oversee, to preserve, and to improve and strengthen a relationship, not bound by any single administration or defined by any single issue, but a relationship that has grown over time, that's become more and more essential globally and personally. A relationship that brings people together, that ensures regional and global stability and security. And when I returned to the United States, as an ambassador this time, I had a clear sense of my mission. It is my goal to explain to the American people why this alliance between our two nations is even more important now than ever before. And that what I've done from the halls of Congress to the communities across this nation, business people in New York, oil workers in Texas, artists in LA, farmers across the Midwest, people who are innovating across this whole country of the United States of America. In all of my travels across America, both physical and virtual, I have had the most exceptional and phenomenal conversations, inspiring, eye-opening, helping me find the connectivity between this great nation and my great nation. And like today, we're having an amazing conversation with a fantastic woman, and yet her experiences are so similar to the experiences of so many women back home. I believe it's conversations like this that we seek to bring our countries closer together, conversations that we hope will fill in the gaps, tell the stories, as Susan said. We have to tell the stories. And often those stories, unfortunately, whether here or there, are often misinterpreted or underreported. But both of our nations are under profound generational change. And we, or they, the next generation, are defining who we want to be as a people. And what course do we really want to set for our future? In Saudi, we're transforming and changing faster than anyone has ever imagined. And that reform process is real and it's here to stay. Through Vision 2030, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's transformation agenda, we are unlocking our nation's untapped potential and inspiring positive change all around us. This change is uplifting all of our people, men and women, and opening the country to the world economically, socially, and culturally. Change that's bringing both of our countries closer. And to be honest, the partnership between our countries has been tested at times. True statement. But a partnership that endures as long as ours, despite our differences, cannot have happened by accident. And if it weren't so critical to both of our nations and to the world. I truly believe that what connects us is a shared vision of a world where sovereign nations with unique laws and customs and beliefs can prosper alongside one another in absolute peace. Not only in peace, but we can also allow our citizens and other citizens to flourish. And that's what our relationship represents to our citizens and to the world. And you know, I do hear the pundits that describe the US-Saudi relationship as one that's under stress. And I disagree. I disagree because I work on the ground and I have observed, as has anyone who has closely followed our common path over the decades, they know that even in moments of that could be perceived as challenging, I would say, we forge ahead in strengthening not only our ties, but our role in the world. And as our relationship continues, I very much look forward to working with the Biden administration, as I have been since they've taken office, not only to review, but to improve our relationship. And I truly believe at the end of this process, both the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States will be even stronger allies. And I thank you, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, you covered everything, so the conversation is done.
We're done.
We're done here. We're so glad to have you again. So many folks know a little bit about the kingdom. However, I'm going to share a little bit of background According to the US Department of State, Saudi Arabia really holds a unique role in the Arab and Islamic worlds. It has the world's second largest oil reserves. It has a strategic location as it's geographically the largest sovereign state in Western Asia and the second largest in the Arab world. It's the only country with both a Red Sea coast and a Persian Gulf coast. And before we go into bilateral relations and the future of the kingdom and women in the kingdom, I want our audience to hear a little bit more about you, Ambassador. The audience may know you grew up in the United States while your father was ambassador from 1983 to 2005. However, they may not know that you are one of 8 children in your family. Your mother is amazing.
Yes, we question why she would do that to herself every single day.
It's pretty amazing. It's remarkable.
It is.
Tell us about your childhood. What was it like growing up in the US and Saudi Arabia? And what were the relationships that shaped you the most during this time?
Well, I was born in Saudi Arabia in 1975. A few months after the death of King Faisal, he was my grandfather, and he was assassinated. And that was a moment of profound shift in the country. That shift also was reflected on my family. I came to the States at age 7, and I started my formal education. I had both my children in the United States in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in the Fairfax County area, for anyone that's familiar with the region. But more than that, I grew up in an idyllic state. It was the 1980s. The world was amazing. It was colorful. It was joyful. And I lived what I would say with my brothers and sisters, a non-diplomatic but highly socially connected lifestyle. Washington, D.C. is the pulse of what I would say the world, more than the United Nations, which maybe is making decisions. But Washington has American the political environment of America that's constantly changing. It has the diplomatic communities that are constantly changing. And all of these children are thrown into this mix, and we've all become friends. And we've grown up knowing each other throughout this world. And I look across the people I went to school with, the people I went to college with are now senators, they're congressmen. I've seen they are the CEOs, they are leaders of their own countries, they are young global leaders, and it's phenomenal. But the America I grew up in was not a diplomatic world because my father didn't include us in that. We didn't know who was a Republican or who was a Democrat. We didn't know who was, of which opinion or the other. We knew their children. We knew them as families. We knew them on Sunday watching, and I apologize for anyone who's a Redskins fan, but we were Dallas Cowboys fans growing up in Washington, D.C. And those were the conversations we were having. You have this onslaught of the cicadas that are now in Washington. I lived through that twice. Billions of these horrific insects, a plague on community and society. And I remember that. I remember Hands Across America, and I remember the best of what I would think is the music and the culture that came out in the 1980s, from the movies and, good times. My memories of America are memories of joy. But as a child, I then recognize as an adult, as our politics, as our world changed, 9/11 happened. The world began to change. And I think those were the seeds of change that I'm dealing with now in my current position now. But I have nothing but the best memories, nothing.
And growing up with your siblings, being one of 8, who are you still closest with today? I mean, there's many options apparently since there's 8.
There's 8.
How do those relationships get shaped? Yeah.
Quite typically in a large family, we separate in groups of 4. We have the 4 originals, and then the other 4 who we call the replacements. They were just placeholders to take the place while the elders were gone, but we're all very close. We were raised to be close, and that happens, by the way, when you leave your home country and you are somewhere else. You seek this identity that's common and shared. And what I found quite interesting is when I was younger, I really didn't begin to meet an Arab community in Washington, D.C. until I was around 15 or 16 years old, because my father was convinced every 2 years that we would be, or every 4 years that we'd be going home. So he really wanted us to understand this American community. And so my link to home was my family, my brothers and sisters and my cousins when we traveled, and my grandparents. Those were my links to home.
Oh, it's important to have those links. Family is is always crucial, right? And I know you have a large family back home with many cousins and everyone.
Indeed.
We have questions coming in, Ambassador, already. And I want to pivot a little bit. And you mentioned this in your opening remarks a little bit about how Saudi students are studying in America. Patrick asks about the different student exchanges that exist between Saudi Arabia and the United States and the different programs that benefit these exchanges. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it benefits both countries?
Absolutely. So today we have over 40,000 Saudi students, and that is absolutely critical because they're not just based in your coastal communities, they are across this country. Why is that important? On multiple levels. Number one, not just because of the educational capacity that they are provided in the United States of America, but it's the community engagements. It's the people-to-people relationships. You can't hate what you know. And if we know each other and we understand each other and we begin to see each other as human beings with the same concerns and the same needs for our families, we can actually begin to talk to each other and work together and solve problems. So that's why it's number one, critically important. Number two, I know my kind, and what I call my kind are people who have studied in the United States, but have come back to the kingdom and are working and bringing the best of what we learned, experienced, or lived here. And we try to implement it back home, whether it's in the private sector or whether it's in the public sector. And I think you'll find that the majority of our ministers were educated in the United States. And the majority of the individuals who are working on Vision 2030, this transformational project, which is going to take us from where we are today as our current state to our future state, which is one that is highly representative of this young population, where over 70% of them are younger than 30 years old. So we're not designing a country for ourselves today. We are designing a country that provides a framework to be what this next generation wants it to be. And how do we do that? We need to all be speaking the same language, speaking the language of innovation, education, change, transformation. And nobody speaks that language better than the United States of America, which is why I'm personally committed to increasing the number of students that come here, but increasing the number of degrees that they're getting and working and coordinating. How can we get a breadth of experience across this country and not just in your key and your major cities? Because America is huge. And what I've experienced across COVID in my engagement from state to state and group to group is you're not the same. You're not a singular, people of single lifestyle or single expression. And I think it's really interesting and it's critical and it's important for every Saudi to understand the breadth of opinion in the United States, the breadth of potential engagement, and the beauty of this country. As much as I need young Americans to come and have a semester abroad in the kingdom, come and work in the kingdom, come and have an internship, because what you will see is very different than the headline you read. It's so easy to dismiss us with a headline, but it's not so easy when you come and you see the change and you taste the change, or you meet the people and you can relate to the people. And so if there's anything I can do is not just give a seat at the table for women, but to open the doors of my country to the men and women of yours. Come and see it and then make up your mind. Is the change real? Is it worth changing? Is there something there? Is there a dream? Is there an aspiration? And I would say yes to all of that.
Well, I know from traveling myself to all 7 continents that going to different countries, seeing on the ground firsthand the culture, the experience, the people is so important. So Ambassador, I'm still waiting on that invitation. I'll come to
Saudi. Open. It's open.
So happy to go with you sometime.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit more about Vision 2030. May is World Trade Month. So it's very fitting we're having this conversation with the World Trade Center. And the United States and Saudi Arabia have many common interests together. And we signed a trade investment framework agreement. And since the launch of Vision 2030, which was in April 2016 to diversify the economy, including increased trade and investment with the United States and other countries, we are now in 2021, so we're almost to 2030. What's next? What happens after Vision 2030?
So after 2030, if we've done our job right, and I do believe we will, you're going to see a country that has a diversified economy. We're stepping away from our singular focus on fossil fuels. That's not to say we're walking away from it fully, but we're diversifying it to make sure that we are never in the crisis mode that we saw ourselves in recently with energy prices, pipelines being hacked, We don't want to be in that position where an economy can be pushed to a standstill. We've seen the impact of COVID. How do you mitigate that? You mitigate that by creating an innovative economy, a knowledge-based economy, a tech-based economy, one based on entrepreneurs, one based on dreamers, with the foundations that are absolutely critical to keep your mainframe economy going. We've invested in high-tech manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and you'll know we'll have been successful if we're the leaders in that, if we're the leaders in a sustainable green energy project, if we are the leaders in educational advances in our region. That's what we want to be. We have invested in a series of these mega cities, and people are often misunderstanding, what do we mean by that? We're creating jobs, we're creating opportunities, and we're creating innovation. NEOM is the city of the future. And that doesn't mean that we have robots walking around. It means we have a clean lifestyle that's focused on the human being and human-centric, and that is human-sized, that positively impacts not just us, but also the environment around us. What would it look like if you had land from scratch and you preserved that land, if you invested in capturing the water, if you preserved the coral reefs all around you and ensured that the habitats of land and water that were there before you were equally respected as you are and thriving as you are? I think it's time, when we talk about what does the future look like, that we stop imagining ourselves in these remote spaces, but we imagine ourselves cohabiting, coexisting, not just with each other, but also with nature. And that's the Saudi Green Initiative. What would it look like if Saudi was no longer a dry desert, but a thriving, rich, green space? And it can be, because it was. But what does that look like? Innovation in water capture, innovation in supporting our neighbors to have clean environments. It's recycling, it's renewables, it's clean energy. It is the future. Our future doesn't have to be bleak. Our future doesn't have to be highly technological. It doesn't need to be, space-driven exclusively. Because I think, as we've seen in COVID, this AI digital revolution, all it's done is isolated us from each other. It's made us more afraid of each other. It's made us separate. And I think the biggest lesson we've had is coexistence with people and nature is really what we need. And that's the vision of Vision 2030, creating this space so that our young people can be those leaders. That's what's next for us as a nation.
Well, it sounds like a good plan. And this mixture between people and nature and climate, that's a huge issue that many countries are grappling with. And so it's good to know that Saudi Arabia is focused on that as well. That's wonderful. And there are so many questions in the chat. Keep throwing them in, everyone. We may not get to all of them, however, we're going to try. Ambassador, you've held so many different leadership roles before this posting to Washington, whether it's being a CEO for different organizations and corporations, work in the international community, the Olympic Committee, and promoting different initiatives for women in the kingdom. I'm curious to know how these different leadership roles shaped your trajectory. In addition to that, a question in the chat that goes along with this from, I think it's from the Honorable Mary Beth Long, who was actually interviewed in my book. She wants to know, what was one of the most difficult professional moments and how did you overcome it?
Wow. Okay. So I'll start with that first. The most difficult professional moment for me was actually when I was offered the job in January to join the Sports Commission, which is now a ministry. And the reason being is literally the night before, I had a whiteboard and I had both my children and I had two very dear friends of mine sit with me. And I said, could you help me draw my 5-year plan for myself? Where would I like to go and how can I get there? I had just launched H.R.H a couple of years before that, which was an entity to help women have financial literacy and financial self-sufficiency entering the workplace, but understanding the skills needed to be a holistically healthy human being and take leadership positions and to grow and develop. And please remember, this is before Vision 2030. And what I was experiencing as a professional woman was not just the obstacles I had trying to enter the world of, commerce and retail and trade, but the women that I was trying to hire were first-time employees, and I felt highly committed as to how can I help these women elevate themselves, develop themselves, but also have future career paths that were bigger than the limitations that they thought they had or society was putting on them. And I was so energized by seeing the women whose lives that we had touched, how they transformed, how they developed, where they were progressing on their careers. And it was profoundly personally satisfying. And I had dreams to take this global and say, if I can manage this in Saudi, where there's limitations and restrictions, what would it look like if we could take our curriculum and take it globally? So we sat down and we created this fantastic map. And we said, how do we grow this? How do we do this? How do we develop this? How do I make sure that as I scale this empire of changing women's lives, and balance it with being a mother of 2 children and what are their needs? So we had this fantastic board, we'd written it out, and I got a call the next morning from Prince Abdullah bin Saud, who was leading the sports committee at that point, and he said, I need you to come into my office. So I went in and he offered me a job, and that job was to lead the women's committee for sports and female inclusion, not just on the Olympic pathways, but the amateur to elite pathway. And I did something that today I'm still horrified, but I cried. I cried in his office, and I had tears coming down, and I was trying to wipe my tears because I had 2 visions that were happening as I was looking at him. The first vision was the dream that I had just drawn the night before, and knowing the impact I knew I could reach if I'd scaled this program that I knew was successful. And on the other side, I had somebody presenting me with an opportunity to change the lives of the women of my country, which would be so much bigger than the dream that I had. And the impact of it would be so tangible and real for women who are right in front of me, the women who I had just the night before said were my core goal. And I was overwhelmed by both opportunities because one was known to me and the other was absolutely unknown. And the decision was that I had to make, will I step on the path of the unknown, knowing that I may not have 100% the skill to do this, but I have the desire and the will and the support. And I do know the people in this world that I could reach out to help me deliver this. But it was a moment of profound inflection for me and fear. And I had to face my fear and go down to the root statement that I had written for myself. How could I possibly open every door I can for those who need the door opened? And how could I use my privilege to create opportunity for others? And I was given the answer right in front of my face. And so I took the opportunity. I walked away from my personal dream to help facilitate what I hope was the dreams of many young women in my country. And that was a moment that changed my life. And that was the biggest decision. And that was the first step to the path that has led me to be in Washington, D.C. as an ambassador representing my country, because we went from working on taking 4 women to the Olympics to creating the full amateur to elite pathway, a sports economy to include women, over 250,000 impactful jobs in the extended sports community, PE in girls' schools, the licensing of women's gyms, changing regulations to allow for women to walk, run, jog, swim in public, to have women's businesses around physical fitness and health. It's shocking the exponential positive impact that has come from the role of women in sports. And now it's a ministry. I then moved into the Sports for All Foundation, which was taking a whole community and community sports activities across our country and making them inclusive for men and women. And the important thing is, and the thread through all of this is, this isn't singularly about uplifting women exclusively. It was giving them a seat at the table to allow for positive change for community and society as a whole. And so the end goal is for everyone to benefit. And for everyone to benefit, what was clearly obvious is not just myself. I didn't need the seat at the table. I needed to open the door to allow for other women to have the seat at the table. And if you look across our sports sector today, from our chairman's office across to 45 federations, we have women everywhere, absolutely everywhere, as athletes, as board members, as administrators, as employees. It's energizing and exciting, but it was the decision that shifted my life. And I probably would have had an easier life with more time for my children had I chosen to stay on path A. But I've had a profoundly fulfilling and compelling life choosing option B. And sometimes option B and the unknown and facing your fear is the path you need to take.
Definitely going the path not walked and going a different, making your own path is the way to go. I felt the same way while writing the book, doing something that others may have judged or said, why are you doing that? So yeah. I hear what you're saying, Ambassador. And to expand upon that, Carrie Douglas asks, how did you do your vision board? What did you actually do?
I have a phenomenal friend. Her name is Reema. We went to a program in Amsterdam called Think, and you work backwards. You say, what's the vision? What would I like to see happen? And then you work backwards and say, what would an outcome be? If I achieved this vision, the outcome would be X. What inputs are needed to make sure that that happens? What do I have to do personally? And what are my basic assumptions? And you basically work backwards and say, if then, if then, if then. And so I drew that out. And anyone who knows me knows I'm a demon with a marker and a whiteboard. I love it. I'll whiteboard anything and post-it note anything. I'm old school. I'm not a computer girl. I'm very old school.
Drawing it out, writing it out.
Drawing it out.
It's the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Ambassador, we've spoken a little bit about this, and I want to expand upon it. Over the past 5 years, there's been a huge change in the kingdom. Public movie theaters have opened. There was the first direct flight between Saudi Arabia and Israel that took place. And women are legally allowed to drive and attend sporting events. And one of the most important social reforms has been about the guardianship system. And this change allows women to be guardians for their children. They can register their marriages, divorces, births, and deaths, and obtain family documents from the government. And women no longer are required to live with their male guardians. Plus, once women reach age 21, they can obtain passports and travel abroad without requiring a male guardian's permission. And that's huge for the kingdom. This change offers women more protection from employment discrimination, which is crucial to have women in the workforce. What changes do you want to see that still need to happen as you look at your own children? What would help the kingdom to expand upon these changes?
So if you look at Vision 2030, it's in 5-year segments. We spent the first 5 years doing two things: redefining priorities, changing regulations, and then piloting programs and initiatives. And with each pilot, what that allowed us to do is to say what works, what doesn't, what needs to change faster, where do we need to focus, and how does this all fit together? But it also allows us critically an opportunity to reframe and reformat very quickly. And that's what the kingdom has been doing. So when you ask me what would I like to see and what challenges come about, every day that we pilot an initiative, there's a change. There is no such thing as a static document. This is a working document. It's a working vision. And the way we will end in 2030 may very well look very different than the initial hypotheses we had when we started Vision 2030 as a program. And that's important because a nation of people is not a singular vision. It is not a singular status. We are a nation of 32 million people, and we need to make sure everybody's included. We need to make sure every lifestyle is included and every mindset and every opportunity is open. The challenges for this next generation will be, the designers and the tinkerers of this vision are following in a mandate that was given to us by our king and our crown prince to say, go do better and help build better. All we can do is create the frameworks that allow this next generation to build and design. And the question is, how do we build a community that understands its faith and its culture, its root, because your identity comes from your root? And how do we give them the flexibility in this cultural experience to design what they need for their future for them to be successful? So that I can't dictate what challenge they're going to face 10, 15 years from now, but what I can do is be mindful. And I encourage every single person who's in a leadership position, as you design a regulation and as you write it, be mindful of the change that will be needed 5 to 10 years from now, because we can only assume and design what we know. We cannot intuit and forecast the details. And that was critical. And I will give you an example. We did that with the Ministry of Sports. There were things our community would not have been ready for in 2016, but we didn't want to limit that vision of what could be. So we said, here are the regulations that are profoundly impactful, must change right now in order for there to be true change, viable access for women, and improvement in their quality of life. But because we don't know what the future holds, caveat number 15 across the board in bold is, these are not written in gold or in stone. These must be changed, and these laws and regulations should have the flexibility to allow for the progress that is needed in this next state. And so how do you build a nation that allows itself to design its own future is you write it in. You write it in, not in the footprints, not in the small print, but bold, that this is today's state, and we allow for the change to come because the people who will be at the table in the future will have different impact in life. They'll have different obstacles, but they'll have different experiences. And my hope would be that we raise a generation of young people who aspire to positive change, cohesive change, and understand their personal impact and the decisions that they take personally, how that impacts the world around them. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not a singular state living on itself and on an island. We have neighbors, we have a community around us, we have a neighborhood. So what we do, positive or negative, impacts everyone around us. Same goes for every individual, whether you think you are a leader at the top of the food chain or you're a cog in the system. You're never a cog. You're a leader in the point, in the position that you are in. You are a leader to your colleagues. You're a leader to the people in your home and your community, if you choose to be. And if that's your choice, behave knowing that you are, when you drop your stone, your footprint, there's a ripple effect. Make sure your ripple is positive. That's my only advice that I can give to this next generation. Your step, make it positive so the person next to you or behind you feels that positivity and joins you, rather than making it a negative step that negatively impacts everybody.
Making positive change, that's the key to it all. And it is all ripple effects, especially with gender parity, equity, and equality. Ambassador, we've had numerous questions about this. So I'm going to put all these different questions together. What advice can you share with us for young Saudi women or young women in general that want to have careers in the foreign service and public service, that want to work in diplomacy?
Okay. Number one, I would say have patience and have courage, because it's a long path, not just because you're a woman, but this career is a long path. I was privileged to have a career and was asked to do this because there's political appointees and then they are civil servants. I'm a political appointee. I was plucked out and asked to do this. But when I look at my female colleagues, I met with 4 exceptional ladies who were in New York at our New York mission last week. And each one of them has worked and persevered and studied and developed herself. I would recommend you travel. I would recommend you learn to debate. I would recommend that you learn conflict resolution, because just because you firmly believe you and your nation are absolutely right when you are committing yourself or you're engaging, you have to understand that your counterpart believes the exact same thing about their nation and their point of view. So how do you engage in a debate with elegance, with respect, and with dignity, where both parties, even though you may disagree, can still find something to agree on? And debate skills and communication skills, I think, are what are absolutely critical. Patience, as I mentioned. And the reason I say travel the world is you cannot possibly understand your strength and weakness unless you've seen everybody else's strength and weakness. And we all have them. Nobody is perfect, neither the US nor the kingdom or anywhere else in the world. But if you understand how to highlight the shared positive and shared value system and the shared narrative, you'll be able to overcome the differences and respect them rather than resent them. And the worst thing we can do is resent each other through our differences. I think it's more healthy to learn to communicate and understand and accept the differences. And that's what I was trying to say in my opening remarks. Each country has a sovereign right to its identity, has a sovereign right to live as its community wants to live. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not right, it's not wrong. It is simply different. And the sooner we can respect each other's differences and learn to work through them so that we can both have positive exponential impact in climate change, in anti-terrorism, in development of women's rights, in development of children's rights, in combating extremism across the world, you're only going to be able to do that if you can respect difference and honor the similarities.
That's totally correct. And I believe that there's similarities and differences, but finding that common ground and really going forward, it's imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Ambassador, you've been such a leader for women, not only in the kingdom, but around the world. And one of the areas that I really love is this idea to create financial self-sufficiency for women. And then that creates independence and really drives gender equity. And you helped create a campaign called Solvable. And if the audience doesn't know about it, I highly recommend you look it up. It's #Solvable. And it basically is liberty for women, and it comes from making financial decisions for their own life. And you've mentioned these solutions. They're not high tech. They're really low tech solutions for low tech problems. Can you tell us more about the importance of this financial literacy program for women? And has there been any pushback from conservative parts of the kingdom? And how do you try to create change in parts of the kingdom that maybe are not ready to change yet?
Sure. Well, Solvable was actually a campaign that I participated in. It was founded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and they asked me what is an issue that I think is solvable in our lifetime. And I do believe financial literacy is solvable. And I do think, and that was the social enterprise that I had created. It was called H.R.H. And its mandate was under the mantle of holistic health. And holistic health means environmental, mental, social, physical, and financial health, because they're all intertwined. How could we help a woman be her best self? And I don't mean that in any cute way, that she's going to be prettier, she's going to be thinner. Her best self is a self that can make decisions for herself independently and rely on herself because the rest of her community relies on her, whether it's her family or her friends or her children or grandchildren. And my fear for women and the women that I was employing was, are they spending their money wisely? Are they saving it wisely? Are they recognizing that once they hit retirement, that their retirement income will not equal the funds that they were making in their full-time employment? Are they saving for that? Are they saving for their future healthcare, for the future healthcare of their family? And I wasn't sure that they were. And so what I needed to explain to these women, I felt compelled to help them understand what I learned, because I wasn't doing that. And as a divorced mother of two, I had to look at my children and say, how am I going to take care of myself? If everything I know around me changes, how do I take care of myself and be independent? And my understanding and my passion around independence is financial liberty. When a woman has her finances, she makes decisions for herself and she feels empowered. And now we have legal constructs in the kingdom that support that. But remember, when I was designing this, it was around 2013, and those legal constructs weren't there. So, and how do I teach a woman to respect the money that she's making? So the bag that you're buying, is it really worth the $5,000 to have this designer bag that you just spent? Or could you put that away and recognize its value for you, in retirement, in buying a house, in investing in yourself? So the low tech solution is simply, what are your life obligations? Quantify that, write it down. What do you owe other people? What do you owe yourself? How would you like to live? What is the cost of your living? What do you need to put aside? What do you need to invest for yourself? And how do you keep yourself sustainable? And we had a whole curriculum, and it was absolutely fantastic. We helped women get themselves out of debt. We helped women manage themselves and recognize, is the income that they're making today an income that's sustainable? If not, what learning do they need to develop themselves, to take that next step up in their career? What learning do they need to hit the trajectory of the dream job that they want? And is the announced dream, the specified dream that they've stated, is that really achievable for them? And if not, how do we get them to that dream, or how do we help reframe it? Because there's no shame in reframing your dream. There's no shame in reframing your vision to be correct to your current situation. But you also don't have to accept that your current state is your only state. And it takes courage sometimes to take that first step into the unknown. And it's amusing to me that I experienced my fear after I created the curriculum, not before, because the thing I had to ask myself is, do I stay in my comfort zone of what I know, or do I do and take the advice I've been giving all women, which is take that first step and lean into your fear, because fantastic things can come if you design it correctly and if you buffer yourself correctly. And that buffering is financial buffering. It's understanding who your support network is. It's mapping out who are the people that will create a safe environment for you to work in. And that can be the caretakers that help you at home, it can be your parents, it can be your friends. So identifying this network around you that allows you to walk into the fear, to create the career for yourself and the life for yourself. Financial liberty for a woman is critical. Understanding how to manage her money, understanding where it goes, understanding where it comes from is liberty. I've experienced it myself. I have seen it in other women. I have seen how their confidence changes because they're decision makers now. And where I'm profoundly proud is in 2013, as we were designing this curriculum, we were designing around regulations that didn't empower women. So we had to figure out, how do we build this so that a woman still has access to what is rightfully hers? That's not our reality today in the kingdom. You read through the list. A woman today has agency over herself. A woman today has the guardianship system, it's dismantled. A woman today invests on her own, has legal representation, has the right to open her bank account. She has her own ID card. She travels the country. She travels in and out of the country. It's unbelievable. The things that I had to work around no longer exist. And I had to question, is the curriculum still valuable? It is, because you don't need to live within restriction to be financially independent or need financial independence. Every human being, male, female, or otherwise, needs it. And I have found that a young man who sees his mother financially empowered in decision-making is a young man that expects his wife, his sister, his daughter to be that woman too. And I also need us to be careful that you don't necessarily have to be a woman that leaves the house to go to the office to work, to be a woman that has a job. The woman in her home, I have always said, is the CEO, COO, head of logistic procurement, NPR, and HR of her family. That's what she does. She is all of that. So she equally needs the skills of financial literacy as the woman who's going out to the workplace and has to juggle her costs, her income, her earnings, and in what people would call the professional context or her professional life. We all deserve a seat at the table. The mother at home is working from home, and the mother in the office is working from the office. It just is. And the mother who's climbing mountains is climbing mountains. We all deserve a seat at the table.
I love that. One, because you use a seat at the table, but two, even my parents growing up told me that financial independence is true independence. And so I always tell women that come to me, invest in yourself, max out your retirement plans, always pay yourself first for the future. And it's so important. And no, we don't need that $5,000 bag. It's not that important. It won't last as long as retirement. Now we are about done, and I want to ask one more quick question before we close out this program. And there are so many questions from the audience, so thank you everyone for putting them in. A reminder to look at the chat. I know my colleague Allison put in her email address. If you have more questions, feel free to submit those to the email address. Ambassador, leave us with one final story of a story that maybe has surprised you in your own leadership, that you've learned along the way, that really changed the way you look at leadership, whether it's through the lens of being a woman, the lens of being an ambassador, a diplomat, the lens of being a mother, whatever lens you want to share with us, but a crucial lesson of leadership that you've learned.
So when I was offered the job at the Ministry of Sports, I had in my mind the type of woman that I'd need to hire. She needed to be dynamic. She needed to be socially engaged. She needed to be able to push buttons, stand on the edge of the cliff, push the envelope. And I had a young lady who kept knocking on my door. Her name was Fatma. And she came to the office, face fully covered. And I looked up, I saw her CV. I was like, interesting CV. I said, but I'm not sure that this is the young lady that's going to be comfortable working in an all-male environment, really getting out there. And we had our first interview with her. Fabulous. I was like, nice lady. Maybe we'll look at her in a couple of days. And I judged her. And I'm ashamed to say I judged her. And she came back a second time. She came back a third time and finally said, I am going to be your employee and I am going to work in this ministry and I am going to make a difference and you're going to see. So we looked at her like, you know what, lady? You're hired. Fatma was my first employee, and Fatma is the woman who today, I can tell you, I could not have understood the impact of the change, could not have worked in the change, could not have designed and developed it if I didn't have Fatma as a part of my team. I left the Ministry of Sports and Fatma continued her career through there from one success to the other. And she told me something so interesting, that she doesn't actually cover her face at home. She comes into work because it was her choice. And I was judging her when I was a woman who was saying, don't judge a woman by what she wears. Don't judge a woman by presentation or limitation. Don't judge a woman. Judge her by the capacity of her ability to deliver, to think and design. And Fatma challenged my own prejudice. And that changed everything for me, because Fatma is the woman that I consider to be one of the core key metrics of my success. She talked me through all of the community mindsets, because remember, I grew up in America. And when I came back to the kingdom, I was an adult. So I missed the nuances of our society. And Fatma was that. She was the voice of the community. And I am profoundly and forever grateful to her and indebted to her. And so if I can say anything, is it's not just about practicing what you preach. It's about challenging yourself to look beyond your personal prejudice, because our prejudices do exist. They sit in us, whether we believe it or not. And the biggest challenge is to make sure that we actually represent fully the goodness we talk of, and holistically deliver on the messages we profess, and recognize our own shortcomings and our own humanity, that we do make mistakes, and acknowledge that when the mistake has been made, that you've made it, and correct it. And I promise you, if you do that, God will gift you with a Fatma too. And I hope everybody has that in their life, that moment of humility, but also accept the gift that's been given.
Well, today has been a gift to speak with you, and thank you so much, Ambassador, for your time. And that's a great story to look at your biases in a different way and challenge them, because we all have them, and it's what we do with them and how we challenge ourselves. Thank you again, Ambassador, and thank you to the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C. and Dublin, and thank you to the audience for tuning in today. Join us online to continue the conversation. Use the hashtag Seat at the Table and Where Leaders Lead. They're two separate hashtags. And if you missed today's program, a reminder that it will be up on YouTube with the Ronald Reagan Building International Trade Center, that channel on YouTube. So check it out, share it with your friends. And before I turn it over to one of our sponsors, Maureen Pace, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this important series, A Seat at the Table, Women in Global Leadership. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table. Maureen, you have the floor.
Wow. Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Madam Ambassador. This has been truly a wonderful discussion, and I only wish we had more time to continue the conversation. On behalf of the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C., and the World Trade Center, Dublin, Ireland, I wish to extend our gratitude to Her Royal Highness for her insights today, as we learned so much more about the progress of women leadership in Saudi Arabia, and to Susan, who, as always, has led us in an exceptionally engaging conversation. I want to thank our audience today for tuning in, and we hope that you'll follow us at Reagan ITC as we resume this series in the fall. At that point in time, as we've said over and over again today, we hope that you will join us and have a seat at the table. Until then, I wish you all a wonderful and safe summer. Thank you so much for joining us today. Be well, and we'll see you soon.